Navy Bob, I'm so excited about you being on Paper Napkin Wisdom today. Thank you for joining me.
Well, thank you so much, sir. It's such an honor and privilege to be here. So thank you for having me.
Oh my gosh, calling me sir. I know you say it with a lot of respect, but I please call me Govan. You're you are the leader in this case. So I defer to you, sir. And I am excited to describe. I'm going to describe your paper napkin, and it just and it's exciting to me. So your napkin at the top says "Leading with Love" with a heart and lines all over it, drawing attention to it, and then it breaks down from there. And I'm going to let us evolve the breakdown, but at the bottom of it is leading with love at the top and resilient workforce at the bottom. Why did you share that with me?
So throughout my 28-year nuclear Navy career, I was a captain of a nuclear submarine. I carried the nuclear codes for President Bush, and I also was the commodore in charge of the largest submarine squadron in the fleet. And as I reflected back in my career, the most successful by far, there were no downsides, was leading with love. All outcomes exceeded beyond expectations. You would become a legendary leader, you build a legendary culture, and you lead a great life. And so as I reflected back and I built this or created this book, it is applicable to any industry. And I have over 50 years of academic research to justify this. And so leading with love, I'm so passionate about this. I know that this world needs more of it, especially in the industry.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that's really interesting. In addition to being Navy Bob, you're also Dr. Ronska. So you've got a strong academic background that you bring to this. But again, I think there's a perceptually the chasm between talking to a Navy submarine commander that carry nuclear codes and you're talking about leading with love. Do you see that as being contradictory at all?
No, I think it's what this world needs to hear today. And I'm proud to be vulnerable, to be able to say that leading with love is the answer, because it is. And so I'll give you some snippets. As I reflected back, when I was captain of the nuclear fast attack USS Texas, it was a $2 billion nuclear submarine. We were on a vital mission, national security, and we're behind enemy lines. And I won't spoil it for you. It's in the book. It talks about submarine stories, beyond the sea, leading with love. But there was no doubt that we were counter detected. We were found out by our adversary submarines. And if we were found out, it was like taking a stone and hitting a bee's hive. And they would come in and bring the kitchen sink to be able to get us to surface or potentially hurt us. But if we were wrong, it would cost the taxpayers about $100 million of the cost of the submarine, the cost of maintenance. And so this one decision and this one critical event that you can read about in the book, it was love that got us out of that. There's no doubt in my mind as I reflect back. At the time, I didn't know it. And I also share stories of behind the scenes at the White House. There's over three chapters working directly for President Bush. And so that is what I want to share with this world of leading with love is the answer. And so if everyone thinks that the military, they got to be tough and just not being vulnerable. In fact, it's contrary to that. If you want to be a great leader, it's important that you put your people first and you are vulnerable and you are empathetic. And I have other examples to prove that. And as I do this research.
So let's go back again. You say leading with love is the answer. So I'll go to the academic side of you and say, so what's the question? What's the problem? What is it the answer to? And then I have a follow-up question to that next.
So the answer is that when I was on a submarine, I rode almost every single nuclear submarine in the fleet. And if you look at everybody in the nuclear Navy goes to the same technical, tactical schools, and all submarines, they're operating the same equipment and same procedures. And yet there would be a profound difference in performance and safety and turnover between submarines. And so I had this hypothesis, this theory. It had to have been because of leadership and culture. And then it was correlated to caring relationships. And I went into beyond the sea. I went into healthcare for 5 years and it was almost the exact same thing. And so when I got my doctorate degree, I came across this theory called leader-member exchange. And a leader-member exchange is a theory that measures the strength of authentic relationships. His name is Dr. Grain. Him and I became great friends, and he endorsed my book. And over 50 years of academic research statistically will prove that if you build authentic relationships or leading with love, all your outcomes will go up. We're talking productivity, we're talking trust, we're talking wellness, we're talking collaboration, innovation, turnover, and safety. And so that is the answer. There's no doubt in my mind.
Now, like I think that when we like to use terms in business, right? And you've seen these terms sort of emerge in business after, in your beyond the sea life, things like pressure testing. We like to do pressure tests and acid tests, and a lot of these terms come from the military. There is nothing more pressure tested, I think, a more pressureful environment to put a test on than submerging, a couple hundred soldiers and pressurizing a tank and then keeping them under sea. So in that environment, you've got a very captive audience. I would think that people have to do what you ask them to do. And so how does productivity look different? Like, how did you learn that productivity lift? Because you weren't in just situations where you commanded, where you saw the love, you saw it with and without. So tell me what that looks like. Tell me how you learned it.
So I learned it from, first, it was my father. I learned leading with love from my father because that's who taught me in the family environment. And then I went to my second submarine. It's in the book. It was USS Asheville underneath Captain Grooms. And I won't go into details, but he really showed me how to lead with love. He put the crew, both personally and professionally, ahead of anything else. And our outcomes were incredible. So when I went to my USS Texas as the captain, the culture of the crew at the time wasn't good. It was like playing whack-a-mole. There were issue after issue after issue. And we had this incredible task to take this brand new Virginia-class submarine, the USS Texas, the second one, underneath the North Pole to certify this ship for Arctic operations. And some of the dangers of taking this first ever underneath a time commitment, when you go underneath the North Pole, you're surrounded by 28-degree water. All the condensation comes out of the air. And sometimes it could be days until you could surface where the ice isn't, it's thin enough that you can surface. And if a water droplet goes on some of these highly energized cabinets, you can short out a microprocessing board and the reactor would scram. And if you can't surface and you can't restore the reactor, you die. So there was that pressure. Then there was foreign submarines reporting to come out and get us. Then we had to transit a place where there's icebergs. And so you can't, long story short, there was so much pressure. But my biggest concern was the culture of the crew. And I did something so simple. I was tired of playing reactive. I knew there would be issues going forward. And all I did was ask them, what are your top 3 concerns? I love you. I care for you. What is it that we're doing that we can make your lives better? And I got a stack like this immediately after a month in command. And I didn't know. So I'll give you one example. There wasn't sufficient number of computers on board. Half the computers were broken, and that entailed, which resulted about 2 hours of extra time that each sailor had to be on board that they couldn't be with their families because they didn't have computers. That was one of many. Then a light bulb went off. I mean, no wonder why we're having all these issues, because the crew didn't care for the ship. And the reason the crew didn't care for the ship is because the ship didn't care for them. And this was applicable in any industry. Once I addressed them and they made them feel valued and loved, there was this critical point where about 2 months after that the crew was no longer fearful of making a mistake to get in trouble. They were fearful of making a mistake to disappoint the ship and the people around them. And when you get that critical mass, it's like going 88 miles an hour in Back to the Future. Your outcomes will take up. And this is applicable in any industry. And so if it can work in a nuclear submarine underneath those conditions, it will work anywhere. And when I talk about the results, we were ranked last in the squadron. We had almost failed a major engineering inspection right before I arrived. And the morale was just terrible. Within 2 months, or 2 years, we had the highest retention in the Pacific Fleet for 2 consecutive years in a row. We scored the highest possible grade on that engineering exam, and we became the best submarine out of 10 with an objective measurement in the entire squadron. And you know what the top concern was at the end? The stack went from this to this, and you can read about in the book. The number one concern of the crew was there wasn't sufficient variety of hot sauces on the mess deck.
Well, I would definitely take issue with that. So that's amazing. So one of the things that I heard you say, and you said it really quickly, maybe Bob, was at the beginning you said you had to make them feel loved first. I think a lot of people have that backward. They want people to come into the organization and be in love with the organization first. But you have to give love to get love. You have to give trust to get trust. You have to start first. Leaders go first. Am I wrong in this? Did I pick up on that wrong?
I completely agree. There's two indicators. One, McKinsey did a article in 2021 during the Great Resignation. And what they found, they went across 10 different countries, multiple different industries, and they surveyed why people are leaving. And of course, you're not going to get this on an exit interview because they're not going to be truthful because they might want to come back. But in this survey, McKinsey they found out the number one reason why they were leaving wasn't because of pay. It's because by far 4 times as much as they didn't feel valued. And when you lead with love, you make them feel valued, just like I did with the crew top 3. And the last one, I will tell you, one of my heroes, I went to Rollins College to get my doctorate in business administration. And one of the famous alum is Mr. Rogers. And Mr. Rogers has this famous quote that says, love and success. It has to be in that order. It's that simple, but yet so difficult, which means exactly what I did. Leaders, if you put love first, I've been hearing this over and over again. Well, if you love somebody, you're not going to have results. I couldn't disagree with that more. If you really want extraordinary results, the recipe for success beyond expectations is you put love first and then results will follow. And so that's where 2 examples of leading with love is the answer.
That's amazing. And first of all, Mr. Rogers is he sort of lived in paper napkins, really. I mean, there's so much that he said that love and belief in a child can lead them to greatness is one of his great things. And I believe in you and I love you just the way you are. These are things that he taught us by putting his feet in the pool in very simple ways. And they're really powerful. I'm touched by that. So let's talk about what the early outcomes in your napkin. Leading with love leads to higher trust, leads to psychological safety, leads to less errors. And you talk about that. You've hinted at this. You've discussed this in saying that your ratings went from the bottom of the fleet to the top of the fleet in all categories. And I think retention is a great leading indicator, but retention, keeping people around and not getting performance, well, that's one thing. Keeping people around, people want to be there, and getting the performance, that's another thing. And is that because you had higher trust, psychological safety, and less errors? What was that about?
Absolutely. So love leads to trust. And during my academic research, the best definition of trust that I came across is having good intentions, but also following up your words with actions. So there's 2 pieces of trust. One, you have to have good intentions. No one's going to trust you if they feel you don't have good intentions, you don't lead with love. The second one is you can lead with love, but you're not going to get results if you don't follow up your words with actions. They're not going to come to you with problems if they know you're not going to respond to them. So trust has 2 components. And going back to the academic research, HBR had an article, High Trust versus Low Trust, in 2018. And what they found, they surveyed high trust organizations, you have less stress, lower burnout, higher productivity. So HBR did an actual study that showed that your workplace employee wellness will go up significantly, and this directly impacts resiliency. When you're not trusting somebody at work, you got this extra anxiety, you're spending energy. And if you're spending energy because you don't trust the people that you're with, because you're not being loved, your productivity will suffer immensely. And that's where it goes right back to resilience. They're going to leave when they're burnt out. They're going to leave if they don't trust you. They're going to leave if they feel like they're overwhelmed because they're so tired because they're worried about, trust.
Really interesting. You said love leads to trust. And I think that's interesting because I think a lot of people would say, I can't love you because I don't trust you, but love comes first. Again,
Yeah.
tell me about that.
So if you look at the definition back to that, good intentions. I'm not going to trust you if I think that you have poor intentions, right? I'm just not. No matter what you do or say, I'm not going to trust you if I internally don't feel like you care for me or you have
Mhm.
bad intentions. And so that love will lead to trust. But again, you can have love, but you might not have trust. An example I give is, I told my son who was in high school at the time, I said, be home by midnight. It's New Year's Eve. And so midnight came about and he was out longer than that. And so do I love my son? Absolutely. But am I going to trust him from coming home again when I ask him to? The answer is no. And so that goes back to exactly what I said with trust. Trust is not only good intentions, but as a leader, the most important thing you can ever do, like I did with the crew top three, is that you follow up your words with actions. If you say you're going to do something, one of the things that you can detriment trust immensely is not follow up your words with actions.
So right now, someone is listening to this podcast. They've got an organization, um, and their team is making errors. They don't have great outcomes. They're not performing at a high level. They don't love their team. They looking at the results, looking at the pain that they're in. They don't love their team. So what would you say to that person?
So that's exactly how I felt when we were playing whack-a-mole. So like any leader or anybody that has bad things happen to them, you immediately think of, like, I got to do more work. This is making my ship look bad because I am the ship. So I wanted to hold people accountable, but I didn't do that because I led with love and I knew that it worked in the past. I looked myself in the mirror and I said, what am I doing as the leader for barriers to set the culture? I'm responsible for this. And that's what I started the crew top three. If you're a leader that you get angry or you want to get vindictive because you're not having good results, the worst thing you can do is not look in the mirror and hold people account or hold yourself accountable for the conditions that you set. But once you do that and you set clear standards, you have to hold people accountable, because then after you set those clear expectations, holding people accountable is an act of love in itself. Your team members would want you, demand of you as a leader, to hold people accountable, because after you set clear expectations, it's your job as a leader.
But the expectations have to be aligned with these good intentions, and you have to go first, right? Follow up words with actions means that you have to go first. You can't say, hey, I expect everybody to be on time and I'm going to be 5 minutes late. I expect everybody to do A, B, and C, and you only show up for D. That's not how it works, right?
Absolutely. And so I'll give you one example. So when I was playing whack-a-mole, like I said, I looked in the mirror, and one of the rash things of we were having problems is that we weren't following procedures. And so in the nuclear Navy, when you don't follow procedures, I could easily start holding people accountable because that's the expectation. But I looked at myself and I said, what culture am I setting? Because when the crew members aren't feeling valued, they don't, like I said, they just do things because they don't want to get in trouble and they make a mistake. And so I went out there and I overly stated that, the definition of procedural compliance is following all initial conditions, precautions, and all step followed and understood. I had them repeat that back every week, right? So as we did that, the expectations were clear, carrying expectations, then whack-a-mole went down. But then a time later, we still had it flare up. And then I would go to the person that didn't follow the procedure. I said, what is the definition of procedural compliance? And they repeated it back. I said, well, if that's the definition of procedural compliance, an initial condition that you didn't follow that caused this procedural violation wasn't followed, I said, why did you do that when you exactly knew what it was? And he didn't have an answer. So that is caring standard. That is an act of love to hold them accountable. And that's how, that is where, just accountability is so important. If you don't want, if you want to have people treated unfairly, just expect them to do something without talking about it or setting expectations, and then hold people accountable.
The first thing that popped into my head when you were talking about procedural compliance is, when I was thinking about what would someone say, or what would they say to each other when they're in the mess hall or whatever, or in the mess room. I don't know what it's called in a submarine, but they'd say, I don't care. But care and love are pretty close together, right? And I think if you, again, going back to what you said, love leads to trust, good intentions, and follow up words with actions. If they don't care, it's because you don't care about
Exactly.
them, right? Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. And going back, this is what I found, is there is an inflection point in culture where if the crew members don't feel cared for, they're not going to hold other people accountable because they just don't care for the ship. If they see something happening, they just don't say anything. But when you hit that inflection point where you get, that critical inflection point of people caring, then what happens is then you will get other people to start caring for others. And when you start caring for others and holding others accountable in a loving way, this is where the 88 miles an hour occurs, because now you got the entire crew rowing the boat in one direction, where before you just had individual people rowing and some weren't rowing at all. That is the beautiful thing about leading with love. When you start developing this culture and you have the entire inflection point of culture, knowing that you care for them, they will start caring for others in the ship. And that is where you see the outcomes take off beyond expectations.
So, do people make less errors because they are so afraid of breaking the rules, or do they make less errors because they love what they're doing and they feel safe? Because if they made an error, they knew they'd be forgiven. Like, I mean, it seems to me like you're saying that if they feel the love and they feel the intentions and they feel that there's follow up and they have trust, they're not afraid of failing because it's not going to be them. They're going to have a conversation and we can talk about what went wrong, right? I mean, is that what, am I misunderstanding part of that?
So you're hitting a nail on the head. When you have care for the ship, right? And you don't want to disappoint those around you or the ship, that disappointment, that awareness that you have is so much more powerful of just hoping you don't make a mistake and hoping you don't get in trouble. So when you have that culture of you're going to make sure you do this right because you love the people around you, you love the ship because they love you, that is where that power, that mental critical thinking will be off the chart compared to if you're just fearful of getting in trouble because it's just not that big of awareness. That is exactly what you were saying.
Many years, and this is sort of coming back to me. I remember reading something, and I wish I could remember what it was, but I remember reading something, and it was a psychological study of veterans who went into battle, and unanimously, they didn't go into battle for country. They went into battle because of the men and women because of the love and care for their brothers and sisters. And so if it's true in the extreme, it's true with systems, process, and structure, right? Like it's the same thing. You don't go into the battle of work without loving the people you're doing this with.
Absolutely. And one of the great, so I saw this in hospital, but I really saw this when I was an executive officer. We deployed with SEAL Delivery Team 1. We had the little miniature submarine on the back. We would deploy from Pearl Harbor, go to undisclosed location. And SEAL Delivery Team 1 at the time had Michael Murphy and those 3 other people deployed during Lone Survivor. And when we're getting underway, we found out that, they had incredible loss. And so if you look at the Lone Survivor movie, do you think of love when it comes to the Navy SEALs? I mean, they're ruthless killers. Some wouldn't think that love and SEALs are even in the same sentence. But look what Michael Murphy did. Michael Murphy knew he was going to lose his life, go on top of a ridge to make a phone call to save Marcus Luttrell and the other members. And so there is no greater love than to sacrifice yourself for another being. There's no other way to explain it. And so fast forward in the book, 2 years later, I'm helping President Bush on stage posthumously give the Medal of Honor to Michael Murphy's parents. And you know who was in the audience in the East Room with President Bush? Was Marcus Luttrell, the lone survivor. And there wasn't a dry eye in the audience. And that was the big thing for me. If the Navy SEALs, you think about how successful the Navy SEALs, probably this most successful organization has ever existed on this planet. If they are so successful, why? It's because they lead with love.
Incredible. And, I mean, goosebumps as you're telling the story. Let's go back to this inflection point. You talk about culture grows and there's an inflection point. I think a lot of people quit too early on getting to that point, right? I think a lot of we fail patience. We don't fail process. The process is going to work, but we quit too early. What would you say to those people that are like, I've tried this and it's just like a slog and it's not working? And what would you say to those people?
So I would say it's like going to the gym. You're not going to see results. You might see some results, but it's that long, consistent process of leading with love. And when you don't lead with love, you're building it up like it's like a gauge. When you don't lead with love, the rapid depressurization of that gauge is so profound. And so consistency is one of the most key ingredients. And the problem is that we don't have a structure in place now with tools and practices. Like when you go to the gym, you know exactly what you're doing. There's a training plan. You're going to go bench, you're going to do this, back buys. We don't have that in leadership. We just say, here's all these things you can do as a leader. Good luck. See how you do. And so what I am doing with Dr. Grain, who's been doing this for 50 years, I'd love to come into an organization, help provide these tools and these leaders awareness on how to really lead with love. And so, yes, so those leaders, just stick with it and, it will get better. And even when I first started, I looked myself in the mirror and I said, what am I doing? But I had faith. I knew through my experiences that leading with love was the answer, and it came through. So absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's really profound. I think the example of the gym is really good, and you can carry that forward also in the depressurization. You're talking about depressurization in the gauges, but another way of thinking about that is, you can have a great diet, and work out all the time, but if you depressurize one time, scale jumps, progress is restricted a little bit, and you have to clean that up first. And that cleanup can take a lot longer than the depressurization, right? Isn't that true?
Yeah, I think I think it's so important to recognize that. You as a leader, the first thing you need to do is you have to change your mindset. You have to put your crew first and foremost. And you have this model. And when you have something bad happens to you, Captain Grooms, when I learned this, he would celebrate things that happen. He would say, it doesn't matter what happens to us. It's what we do to make sure it doesn't happen again. That's an act of love. And so if you're a leader that gets mad or, upset if something happens, you need to celebrate this, because you could have actually hurt people much more worse. But what you do as a leader is make sure that you put things in place to make sure it doesn't happen again. So that is so critical on that feeling of just wanting to fix things and leading with love.
Just curious about something, we always talk, I mean, one of the mantras that we talk about here and we've learned through paper napkins in the past is, celebrate in public. When somebody needs to be celebrated, you celebrate right out in public and everybody can hear about it. But I kind of wonder about the constrained space of a submarine. And when you're having those conversations of accountability, which are supposed to be private, was that something you really took seriously, even in constrained spaces? And in high pressure environments. Is that something you can do, or did you ever make an exception to that? How did that look?
Yeah, so I learned it, good and bad. In the book, I talk about my first command, who was underneath a tyrant leader. And he actually made me pee my pants once because he yelled at me so loudly in public. And so I talk about that experience. I learned so much from him. And if you look at that ship, we had terrible outcomes. We had a significant $9 million main engine casualty. We ran into a buoy. The retention was just terrible. And so that's what the first indicator that I had. But when I was in command, knowing that that was the culture, when anything happened, I would say, all right, let's celebrate this. Let's get together. Let's figure out the root cause so that we can not make it happen again. And when everyone was in the room, we wanted to get to the root cause of why that was. Was it training? Was it just procedures? Was it equipment? And when you get that feeling of love and caring, people will come forward and tell you so much more than what you've ever expected.
I think I misunderstood you. You're talking about celebrating the learning opportunity.
Yes.
You're not talking about celebrating the win. You're talking about the win being the learning opportunity. You said that so casually, it went right past me. That's really interesting.
Oh, again, you won't find this I worked 5 years in healthcare. It's exactly opposite. When someone makes a mistake, you immediately want to look to punish them
Yeah.
and hold them accountable. But in the nuclear Navy, and I try to instill this in healthcare, in the nuclear Navy, if something happened, we would celebrate it because, the ship's not on the bottom. We didn't have a reactor accident. We celebrated this because we found a Swiss cheese hole that could have prevented so much worse catastrophic event. So this encourages people to speak up, share lessons learned, share deficiencies. So this is why the nuclear Navy in over 75 years have never had a reactor accident, one of the things, and we have 20-year-old sailors operating these highly enriched nuclear reactors. The same uranium bullets that's in Chernobyl or 3 Mile Island is in the nuclear plants. And that culture of celebrating, loving, caring, critical thinking is what's driving the nuclear Navy.
Mind blown. That was celebrating the learning opportunity, celebrating not the mistake, but the moment to come together is a really powerful thing. I think that's a great place to leave it. And I mentioned this off the top, maybe Bob, we do this new thing called shout outs. Who would you like to shout out?
So if I could, I'd love to shout out 2 people. My father, who is no longer with us, who taught me to lead with love at home. He definitely, it was agape. There's no other way to explain it. But I also like to call out Captain Grooms, who we're in touch today. He was the individual that really taught me how you could lead with love in the workplace. And his fingerprints not only are over my success, but there's countless of people that I trained that it wasn't my success. It wasn't it was his fingerprints through me. And so those are the 2 people I'd love to shout out. And those were how I learned leading with love.
This was powerful. Maybe Bob, thank you for joining me today.
Oh, thank you so much. Such a pleasure. Have a wonderful day.